Yo guys, what is up? Moxie here with another Path of Exile video, and today I wanted to show you guys some more gameplay from my time in LA playing the Poison Ranger. But I also wanted to really break down, now that we have seen like a lot more of the like skills and supports, and I've gotten a chance to kind of like reflect and also watch other people's gameplay from other classes. I feel like I've learned a lot about what went right on my like 8 hours of playing and what went wrong. There's some pretty huge support gems and synergies that I definitely did miss out on that I think would have made my playthrough like a lot easier. And so I wanted to break down some of those things. This is not like a leveling guide by any means, but I did kind of just want to show you guys some more raw gameplay. I've gotten a lot of requests for some more raw gameplay, but also break down some of the things that I wish I had done differently when I was playing the Poison Ranger. Hope you guys enjoy the breakdown. Let's get right into it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was bossing. Now, my bossing DPS felt solid, not great. The nice thing about Poison is that you have like pretty 100% uptime on your damage on bosses. But when I was comparing it to some other footage, the footage on the left is some mercenary gameplay from Big Ducks that I do have his permission to use. I was noticing that just about on every boss, I was killing slower than the like mercenary counterpart. We were killing faster than Grenade Mercenary, which I thought was interesting, but slower than like Crossbow Mercenary. But bossing was definitely something that is a weakness of Poison early on. And the big reason for that, in my opinion, is because Poison has limited stacks. For example, on this boss, I can only have 2 stacks of poison at max. So once I'm at 2 stacks of poison, shooting him with more poison damage doesn't really do anything for me. Obviously, it refreshes the stacks and keeps him poisoned, but I'm not gaining any extra damage. I'm not ramping damage, where if I had like 10 stacks, I could constantly be ramping damage. And so the big question is, how do we get more boss damage when we're very early on if we're limited to our amount of poisons? I think one answer is swapping between poison and lightning. Weapon swapping is definitely encouraged, and lightning skills felt pretty solid early on. You could get poison on an enemy, make sure that they're poisoned enough, and then instead of firing more poison, shoot lightning arrows at them, and then just use poison as a way to refresh it, so you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. However, I think there's a little bit of a better answer, and this is kind of my plan to get set up early. Once again, I'm not 100% sure that this is how this is going to work, but if it does, I think it'll drastically improve our bossing damage, and I'm sad I didn't find it on my first run through. So the setup that I'm referencing has to do with one skill and one support. This skill is Dark Effigy. This is a totem that we can get relatively early. It only requires level 6. It does require 38 intelligence, so we might want to get some intelligence in our travel nodes, but it reads that it raises a totem that bombards enemies afflicted by chaos damage over time debuffs. So we're going to need an enemy afflicted by poison. Poison is a chaos damage over time, and then the totem should fire projectiles at them. And what we're going to pair with that is Withering Touch. Now, this says that Wither lasts for 4 seconds. Our supported skill deals 30% less damage. We're not here for the damage. What we're here for is Withered. Supported skill has a 25% chance to inflict Withered on hit with Chaos damage. Now, I believe this totem, it will be Chaos damage. It has the Chaos tag. And so every time that this totem is hitting an enemy, it's going to have a chance to apply Withered. What is Withered, you say? Withered is a debuff that makes enemies take multiplicative more chaos damage. It is 6% increased chaos damage per stack, and it stacks up to 15 times for over 9, or for exactly 90% multiplicative increased chaos damage or poison damage in our case, which would be incredible for us to set up early for bosses. I don't think this is something that you would use for mobbing. Obviously, you could for like some tankier targets, but if we can only have a certain amount of stacks on an enemy, the big question is, how do we make that damage deal more damage? There's not that many options super early on, but getting debuffs like Wither on an enemy will make a massive difference. And I imagine that having 90% increase more damage on these bosses early on would have made a big difference in our time to kill. Now, once again, this is a theory. This is not like proven. I haven't tested this myself, but it seems like it would work well. And this is definitely something that I'm going to be setting up early to make sure that this is a synergy that we could use, because otherwise we're going to have to find something else to inflict Wither for us. So that, in theory, helps with our bossing damage for sure. but it doesn't solve some of the mobbing issues that I was also experiencing on Poison Ranger. One of the things that you'll note in my gameplay, especially once I got into the higher parts of Act 2, was I was kind of just getting overrun by enemies. I didn't have the damage to kill them quick enough, and I was constantly having to like backpedal and roll away and retreat, and just kind of kill enemies slowly. Whereas if I had more damage, obviously I could kill them a bit faster. But one thing that's very much ingrained into the like poison skills is slows and hinders. You get many sources of slows and the ability to hinder enemies, which would also slow their movement speed. And I think this would make a big difference in terms of my like ability to create spacing, because obviously on Ranger we're not going to be the tankiest, and if we can avoid enemies just jumping on top of us, that is going to help a lot. As you can see in this gameplay, I'm kind of getting swarmed. I'm constantly having to backpedal, constantly retreating, and trying to create space where I'm kind of struggling with that aspect. And I think leaning into the kind of CC abilities of Poison is going to make a big difference for not only survivability, but also the clear speed so that you can shoot more. Obviously, if you're constantly having to roll and constantly having to get away from things, you're not able to deal as much damage because you're not able to attack as often. And there's a few things that we can do that I think will help alleviate some of these problems. So to help us with our crowd control and our damage, there's two skills that I wanted to kind of talk about. Obviously, I'm sure there's plenty more, but this is what I've come up with. So Vine Arrow is a skill that fires a plant on the ground that latches onto enemies and slows them and poisons them. This skill you get really early, and I was kind of leaning into the damage of this thing, but I think I should have been leaning into using it more as a utility skill and pairing it with skills such as Encumbrance. Encumbrance increases the slow effect of skills by 30%, making Vine Arrow a much more potent skill for just slowing enemies down. And I think this would have helped us a bunch, but definitely not solved all of our issues. The thing that I do think is going to be really interesting that I wasn't using at all is Despair. Now, Despair is a curse that we're going to want to use regardless, simply for the fact that it lowers enemies' chaos resistance. This is going to be a spell or a curse that you're going to want to cast on enemies that are tanky, such as bosses, elites, rare mobs, because you're just going to deal more damage against them. I did not have access to Despair in my time playing, but there's something really cool that we can do with Despair, and that is linking it to Decaying Hex. This supports cursed skills, and cursed enemies' bodies decay, taking chaos damage over time. Where we're going to use this for is to give us a dot with Despair. Despair will now dot enemies, and we don't really care about the damage that it's dealing. We just care that it is a dot, because we're going to link this with Chaotic Freeze. This supports spells. Despair is a curse spell, so that should work there. And it supports spells that deal non-ailment chaos damage over time. Non-ailment chaos damage over time basically means not poison, right? And Decaying Hex gives us a damage over time that is non-ailment. It's just chaos damage over time. It's nothing to do with poison. So we're like getting all the boxes checked for this. But now enemies taking damage over time from debuffs caused by supported skills will suffer freeze buildup from chaos damage hits from any source. So now, once again, we don't care about the damage we just care that this is working. Now, any of our poison skills are actually going to be able to freeze, which is kind of insane. I'm upset that I didn't find this when I was playing. Obviously, I only had a limited time, and I was trying to go as fast as I could, but this is going to give our Poison Ranger the ability to freeze, and I think that's going to introduce a lot of new synergies for the build, such as like things with freeze damage and building up freeze, but it's also going to alleviate a lot of the issues of just getting swarmed by enemies. We are going to be a squishy ranger. We don't want enemies piling on us, and the ability to freeze on a poison build sounds pretty crazy to me. Once again, this is not something that I've tested, but everything lines up, and I'm hoping that this works because I plan to implement it towards my build. This is definitely getting a little bit crazier with it, but for example, if we do incorporate freeze into the build and that synergy that I just talked about works, it opens up the build to so many new possibilities, such as using cast on freeze. These meta gems are like cast on freeze, cast on ignite, cast on shock, cast on crit, and they're way harder for our poison build to take advantage of because, for example, the only one that really applies to us is cast on crit, and it's going to take quite a while to get a meaningful amount of crit chance. But cast on freeze is something that we could potentially use, and we could do some pretty cool synergies with it. I'm not saying that this is what I'm going to do. I just kind of want to like showcase some interesting things that you could use. There's so many options though. But for example, we could link this to Comet, which calls down a comet, and the hits of the comet are freezing. So Comet being called down would give us more freeze buildup. So we'd kind of have Comet casting or building up, cast on freeze, being cast on it for a little bit of a loop. This does good damage, but we'd mainly be using it for the freeze for more like survivability. But we could also link it to Contagion. Now this is where things get a little bit wackier. This afflicts an enemy with a single debuff that deals chaos damage over time. If the enemy dies while affected by Contagion, it and all other chaos damage over time debuffs spread to nearby enemies and refresh their durations. Now, I'm not positive if this will work like this, but it sounds like if we have Contagion on an enemy, all of our poisons on that enemy when they die will spread to nearby enemies. This is used with like Essence Drain in Path of Exile 1 to chain explosion chaos damage. I just looked it up both in the tooltip that I had on PoE 2 and in PoE 1, and poison is considered a debuff. So it says it and all other chaos damage over time debuffs spread to nearby enemies and refresh their durations. So this should in theory work for our poisons and give us all of our poisons spreading, which seems pretty strong, especially for clear, and a synergy that we could use if we're getting cast on freeze. Obviously, we could manually cast this, but having it automated for us would be really nice. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is just how to deal more damage with just our poisons. We talked about like Wither and Despair and Freeze and Utility, but how do we just deal more upfront damage with our poisons? And I kind of wanted to show you this example. So this was a boss that I was stuck on. Right now you can see me socketing the Corrosion gem on Toxic Growth, and I had tried maybe 5 or 6 times to kill this boss, all fails. All running out of mana or health flats, all just eventually dying down. I just didn't have the damage until I applied Corrosion to my Toxic Growths. Those are those pods that you can see me putting down. And off the bat, that little indicator on the boss's bar is indicating that I have broken his armor. And this was the first time that I put the gem on and the first time that I was able to kill this boss. Now, what is Corrosion? Why is it going to be so important for our poison damage? Now, Corrosion gives our poisons the ability to break armor equal to 3,500% of our poison damage dealt, which basically means that poison is a very good skill to break armor. Now, armor is going to give enemies physical damage negation. Why is that important for a poison build? Well, poisons deal damage based off of the hit, and if enemies are resisting the hit or are taking less damage from the hit, our poisons are going to deal less damage. And so wherever you have the space for, I think putting Corrosion on poison skills is obviously going to be very important. And I was messing around with this, and it definitely made a difference when we were armor breaking enemies. One of the things that I did miss, though, however, is Exploit Weakness. This gives our poisons, when they're breaking armor, and the skills that they're linked to, when we do fully break an enemy's armor, we can deal 50% more damage to them by consuming the armor. If I understand this correctly, this would mean that the enemy gets all of their armor back, but if you look at the gameplay and how fast we're breaking armor, this would be a like relatively frequent uptime of just 50% more damage, poison scale off the hit. So if the poison is proccing off of a 50% more multiplier, it's just going to be a much stronger poison. And I think this is going to be a synergy that we're definitely going to want to look into and possibly implement into the build. The other thing to mention with this is Break Endurance. This, whenever we break enemy's armor, we get a guaranteed endurance charge, and endurance charges are going to be really important if we go for Resonance. Now, a lot of ranger skills deal more damage, fire more arrows, repeat multiple times if we have frenzy charges. There's not a ton of great ways to get frenzy charges. It's either like pinning enemies or some weird shenanigans. But anytime we break enemy armor, we get an endurance charge. And with resonance, anytime that we gain an endurance charge, we're actually going to get a frenzy charge instead. So I think this might actually be a pretty strong way to build up frenzy charges. And then we could pair that with skills like, for example, Barrage, which I think basically every ranger build is going to want to take advantage of, which causes your next bow attack to repeat 2 times, and then you get an additional repeat on your bow attacks per frenzy charge consumed. So we're whatever bow skill we're going to be using, if we're going to be using poison on that, we're just going to be able to build up extra frenzy charges and have our skills repeating multiple times. And this is a synergy that I didn't figure out in my time playing, and only after I looked through a bunch more of the skills. And I think that could be really strong. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. As promised, I'm just going to leave the video with some extra raw gameplay of Poison Ranger without my commentary or anything over it. If you just kind of want to check that out and see a bit of how it plays. Once again, I think I was definitely playing suboptimally, and I was missing some pretty crucial synergies in my time playing, but I'm glad that I've been able to play and get the chance to reflect, and I think we're gonna have a much stronger start on Poison Ranger when the game launches. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch y'all in the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.
Flourish!
You shouldn't have come back here.
You're nothing but a rabid animal!